When it comes to building a security strategy, what's your best piece of advice? Building a security strategy needs to come from the whole business. It can't be a function of a couple of two or three of the leaders in IT or risk. We need to make sure that it's holistic and that really we're heading towards true north for the organization. And that's different for everybody. That might be protecting intellectual property, making sure that we've got really strict controls around compliance, or it might be just making sure that everything can operate, that we've got really high levels of resilience, and that we can respond and detect incidents rapidly, and we've got the people and process to be able to do that. And so, security strategies shouldn't be about trying to boil the ocean. What are the 2 or 3 things that we're really going to focus on over the next 90 days or 6 months to make sure that we move the needle on risk? We can have great ambition, and that's fantastic, but let's make sure that we focus on what's important first. I don't know where my security gaps are post-COVID. Where do I start? That's a good question. Where do you start? So asset inventory, super important. Most underrated kind of tool that we have in our kit bag. Asset inventory, you can't protect what you can't see or you don't know about. So making sure that it's detailed, that it's up to date, and ready to go when you need it, way to go. And then it's just about understanding, who are the attackers that are going to be looking at our data, why do they want it, and making sure that, then we can put appropriate controls in place. I'm up in front of the board next week to present my security strategy. Any advice? So I think that, when we're presenting to the board, we want to make sure that we've got an understanding of what sort of the top-down risks in our organization are. If we don't have that kind of risk-based approach, then getting funding or writing a business case for security tools is just going to be pretty ineffective and not going to land. So we need to make sure that we can join the dots between that high-level sort of, how do we use cybersecurity to our strategic advantage, rather than what are all the things that we need to go and buy to solve X, Y, Z problems. Making sure that there's enough risk conversation in there to make sure that when we're talking about new controls, we understand the impact that they're going to have, and how it's going to reduce the risk to our organization. If we can't do that, then what's the point? Will I ever be fully protected against cyber attack? Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. It's just about managing your residual risk. Understanding where you are today and where you want to be 12 months or 3 years in the future. Where's the business going? How is it growing from a strategic standpoint? What matters most to the business? And then make sure that you're focusing effort based on that. Because I think that it's one thing to say we've had a phishing attack or we've had this data breach, but how we make sure that we really focus not just the effort of our technology teams and our security teams, but the whole organization. I've spent a ton on security tooling in the past 12 months and still don't feel confident we'd know if we were breached. What do I do next? It starts with a really deep understanding of the risks to your business and where you are today. What is the status quo? Because then you've got, you know at least what you don't know about. And cyber attacks, they can be sort of, they can be unrelenting and they can be unpredictable, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing that we can do. There is some science behind it, and there are plenty of frameworks and strategies that we can use to make sure that we're paying attention to the right things. And so, in terms of what do I do next, making sure that you understand kind of the data and the tooling that you've got exposure to, and is it good quality data? Garbage in, garbage out. Making sure that what we're looking at are the right things, that we're focusing on what's important, and then maturing it. Otherwise, you're just kind of throwing a dart at the dartboard and hoping that it sticks. I'm in the process of securing security budget. Where should I prioritize my spend, and how do I get the buy-in? We've talked about focusing on what matters most, and there are some really complicated ways of making sure that we're reducing risk, or that our return on investment has a suitable way of driving down that risk. But in terms of prioritizing, it really needs to be based on the strategic objectives of the business. Too often we look through a list of vendor tools or different types of protection that are commonplace in the market, and we lose sight of the fact that at some point those protective controls, they're going to fail. And so when they do, what happens next? And so it's the priority is not always about spending money on the new tool set or getting more people. Maybe it's about making sure that we've got the right policies in place and the procedures that are really clearly articulated for our people to follow when those protective controls do fail. In terms of getting the buy-in, it's about finding the balance between providing enough detail for people to understand without getting too far down the technical rabbit hole. And that's hard sometimes. But people are not silly. The executives and boards, they understand risk, but they just lack context sometimes. So making sure that cybersecurity is not some smoke and mirrors kind of blinky box thing that happens in the server room, but it's more about protecting our people and the data and the assets of our business. I've inherited the hat of security. What do I need to prioritize? There are two things that I would prioritize if I was taking the hat of security for the first time. One is understanding the risks to the business and where we're heading strategically. What are going to be the impediments to growth over the next 1 to 5 years out, so that we're beginning with the end in mind. Yes, there's going to be some tactical and operational things that we need to tackle, but cybersecurity needs to become part of the business strategy. It needs to be an accelerator and not a brake. So if we don't have that strategic lens as we're getting information and we're working with the different teams, then we're going to lack the context that we need to do our job effectively. And the second part is around asset inventory. Knowing what we're protecting. Where are the blind spots? And that's a bit of a trick question. If you knew about them, they wouldn't be blind. But how have we made sure that we're engaged with all of the stakeholders across the business, not just this function of technology and IT, but all across, from finance to risk to people and culture. There are threats that are going to come from all of these different areas. So making sure that we've got engagement with all of those business units so that we can all pull in the same direction.